Okay, so this is the 2025 Toronto Grand Prix men's 50-meter freestyle long course. What we have here is Ben Winterborn, Misha Bagrianski, Albert Bouley, Leam Weaver in lane 4, and in lane 8 we have Adnan Atwan. Okay, so we're just going to watch the video first, and then we'll go through swimmer by swimmer analysis. All right, so starting off with Ben in lane 1. Let's check this out. So we probably have a take our marks there. We can see everyone sets up. Something to note there, Ben, is taking a look at this back leg. We're seeing a smaller than 90-degree angle on this inside of your knee. Generally what we're looking for is a slightly higher angle, looking at like 90 degrees, larger than 90 degrees. That way you're not in a balanced position with this leg where it's maintaining this. We can see once we get to a 90-degree angle, everything in your musculature is pushing, but up until that point, your muscles are in balance with each other. So we want to get to the point where we're only pushing. We may as well start in that position. So potentially thinking about moving that block back, maybe potentially thinking about settling forward a little bit more on that take your marks. We can see that you generally settle back into the blocks, not badly or egregiously, but there is that reverse motion. Theoretically, if we can sit farther out over empty space, the better. We want to move less distance, especially in a 50-meter freestyle. If we can be inches in front of our opponents at the start, then let's do that. But I think the go probably happens when I started tracking right to left. Sorry, inverse of that, left to right. We can see pretty much the first reaction from you. Is firing that back foot. So that's great. Keep that up. We want that to be the first thing that we're firing. If we can open up that back angle, then we're going to be even more advantageous. Another way to open up the back angle is potentially raising the hips. We saw those couple of frames. You're firing that back leg, and immediately we're seeing your hips travel forward, the direction we want to be going in. Getting great extension on that rear leg, followed up with great extension on the front leg, powering us out into space. Pretty solid entry so far. A little bit of a splash on the end there. Could add a bit more shape, a little bit more curl, a bit more of a soft pike into the dive to help us avoid that little bit of your feet slapping the water there. But overall, you're entering the water really, really wonderfully. We can see that there's not a whole lot of bubbles going on around you. We can compare that to less nice dives, although everyone here pretty much has nice dives. Maybe Albert doesn't have quite as nice, but you can see the difference in the amount of bubbles around you. And you're emerging out of that very nicely. Pretty solid kick. We can see there's good undulation going on with your core, which is what we want to see, and yet your upper body is a very stable. Your upper body being ribs up versus ribs down in this case. Maybe a little flicky. Let's see that in full speed here. Maybe a little flicky. Maybe it could be a bit flicky from the knees is what I'm meaning. Maybe it could be a bit more with the hips as well. That was a little frame there that I didn't like seeing. Let's see that. Don't like that. Don't like seeing the fingers all splayed out like that. You're creating tiny little pockets, little tiny spots where water is essentially going to be, for however briefly, trapped. You're creating a higher drag environment than you and I both know you're capable of, so get that together. You do recover that, which is good, but still. Great breakout by the looks of it. Very nicely done. I like that a lot. I do cut you off a little bit toward the end. You look like you're powering very nicely. I cut you off, sorry. And how do we do with the finish? Pretty nicely done. Overall, great race. You know, if there's anything to talk about in the actual swim itself, maybe we could increase our stroke rate a little bit, so long as we are maintaining our hold on the water. It doesn't look like you breathe, so even if you are sneaking a breath in there, you're doing it wonderfully. If you're not breathing, which is my recommendation for the 50 freestyle, great. You're not wasting any time with that. The touch is also pretty fine. Just make sure that you don't get into any habit where you are swinging over onto your side egregiously or onto your back to, say, for instance, check the time. Doesn't look like you're concerned with checking the time, which is perfect because we're more concerned with finishing the race in as long a body position as possible. Overall, really well done, Ben. Back to it. Coming over to Misha. Let's check out the start here. So we have a take your marks probably here happening. I like the little bit of a lean out that you're doing. We can see frame by frame, you're motioning out, you're leaning out. Back leg looks like it probably is in a great position with that 90 degrees. So I'm liking the setup here. Maybe we could have that front knee, that front leg a little bit closer. I think you have the potential to lean out a little bit more, right? I'd like to see a load on the front leg a bit more. We can think about what kind of work you're able to do with a contraction in the leg like this. If you were going to do a deadlift or a squat, it would be very easy to do a squat if your range of motion was from this contraction to a full extension, so standing up, because the range of motion is very, very limited. So you'd presumably be able to lift a lot of weight, but the amount of actual mechanical work that you're doing is very, very small. Just doing from this extension to straight up and down. So we want to utilize our muscles. We want to make sure that when we load and we have a contracted muscle, that when we then extend, that we're allowing ourselves to do the work that we train for. You can even see that clearly go just happened in the last couple of frames. And you are contracting that front leg. When we say take our marks, let's get down into this position that your initial reaction is to get into. So something that looks a bit more like this frame, right? Find this balance point in a take your marks, sit, 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 and then go, so that that back leg is the first thing that's firing, I think is going to help. Certainly be interesting to explore. Let's analyze the dive for what it is, though. Let's see what moves first. We see a bit of a shoulder reaction there on that last frame, a tightening of the upper body. So go occurs, and your first reaction is to tense up more. Ideally, reaction number one is extending that back leg, because extending that back leg is where we're actually going to see forward motion. We don't want to give our opponents time where they get to potentially move while you're sitting tensing on the block. We are shooting at, I think, 24 or 30 frames per second in this video, so 30, whatever 30 divided by 100 is, how many hundredths of a second each frame represents. We're not talking about, all in all, a lot of wasted time here, but this is the 50 freestyle, and we are dealing with these scales of time as the difference between winning and losing. So they are important scales of time to be talking about. We see the back pushing now-ish, getting great extension on the back leg, front extension. Looked really good until that last frame there. You're getting great extension, but then it looks like at this point it kind of flicks up. So to me, that's telling me you're almost pushing up rather than back. because it just traveled that distance kind of up automatically. So I'd like to see you try and get that front leg anchored a bit more and really be pushing out rather than potentially letting that flick occur. And we can see you get a little bit of like awkward hang time there. You're sort of, I mean, interestingly, you have a really great entry. But even there, we see a little bit of a float, maybe, to describe it, going on in the air, and a little bit of a floop into the water. But I think clearly we can see, you know, you and Ben have the best entries. They're not the farthest entries. We can see how far Liam is jumping out. But your entry being clean is indicative of hitting the water at the highest potential velocity the most efficiently. Divers are marked and graded on their splash because it represents their ability to efficiently and safely enter the water. It's not just because the splashes look bad or something. It is because of how refined and how precise their entry is. If you jump off a 100-foot cliff into water and you land with, you know, high surface area exposure, you're going to create a big splash, and guess what? You might break something, or, you know, worse. But if you enter with a very, very small surface area, create no splash, you're going to slice through the water and survive that fall. That's why we're shooting for a low splash, right? The fastest part of any swim is the dive. We want to preserve that momentum and forward speed as long as possible. The underwater is looking great, though. Let's see. I'm happy with the amount of bounce that's going on in the upper body. Maybe it could be a bit bigger, but honestly, pretty darn good. Let's see the breakout. A little not as energetic as I'd like it to be. That's a very strong opening stroke and second stroke, but a little bit more zest would be nice. It is always easier to go from 100% effort to 0% effort. Compared to 0% effort to 100% effort. It's easier to stop doing something than it is to start doing something. With that logic applied, it is easier when we have the most potential energy to burn that energy right at the start. Create the highest speed, maintain the highest speed here, and then fatigue throughout the 50 freestyle, rather than start here, allow for a slower than possible swim, and then hope that you can maybe start racing someone towards the end. No, we want to blow their brains out right at the start of the race. So a little bit more energy on that would be great to see. A little bit of a slow stroke rate compared to the other guys. Maybe you're kind of, I mean, even Liam, who classically has a slightly slower stroke rate because his arms are so long, he's beating you on the stroke rate. But another element here is we can see that you're sweeping around in your recovery and you're kind of hacking in on the side into the entry position. So one of two things might be happening here. One, you're creating stress on your shoulders because you are hacking in the water on a lateral angle. Or two, you're entering wide. Generally speaking, we want to be entering at shoulder width in front of us because that's where we're going to be able to load up the most amount of our musculature to create and generate the most amount of force to develop forward momentum. Landing outside, again, it can be strong, but it's just not going to be able to apply as much force. And again, the alternative is that you might be, with this hack, providing unnecessary stress on your shoulders, so potentially injury prone. We can see that you track from the center of the lane in these last 15-20 meters, and you start to sweep in on the left here. I don't think that this is a perspective issue, and we can see you end over here. Again, we're not talking about much here, but in effect you have zigged or zagged in a 50 freestyle, and I think it's worth mentioning, at the start of this analysis that we could be a few inches farther up ahead on the blocks. Well, you've definitely traveled inches longer than you know, assuming everyone else swam in a straight line, you've traveled at least inches farther than they have. So this is great because this is low-hanging fruit. These are all very easy opportunities that you can work on, and suddenly you will be giving yourself a break. But great swim overall. I like that finish, I think. Maybe last couple of strokes kind of slow down. But all right in general. Nice swim. Let's just bring it all the way back here. Okay, over to you, Albert. Let's see. So we are in the take your marks position. I'm liking that back leg. I'm generally liking how forward you are. Very stable. Go must happen around here. We can see some movement on the blocks from the other gentleman. First reaction. Might have been a dip there. Frame by frame. A little bit of a head dip there. There's the head dip actually happening. So you're rolling forwards. You can see actually that your hips are kind of moving forwards, which is great. We want hips moving forward as soon as possible. But I'd argue that they're probably moving forward because your shoulders are lowering. So yes, they're moving forward, but are they moving forward because you're pushing on that back leg? Not entirely sure. We definitely see that there's a contraction in your arms. You're going from this angle to that angle, right? You're dropping, 45 degrees or something like that on your arms. The difference, and this is key, right? This is where I don't agree with the philosophy that an arm pull does anything for us. Liam has no arm pull, and he is already head, shoulders, and ribs ahead of you on the start. His reaction time, probably equally fast as your initial reaction time, but you've decided to do something else other than move forward. So getting that back leg to be the firing mechanism, the first point of a reaction on go, is a key element. But you do get to extending pretty fast. Great extension on that back leg. And I love that by the time we are at that full extension on the back leg, that your front leg still retaining that 90-degree angle, so you're able to do all of the work from a squat position to a standing position. Awesome. Really liking that. Getting your hands out. Maybe we want to get the hips a little higher than that, create a bit more of an arc. And we can see there's maybe not, I think that little splash there, that little flop that's occurring is partially happening because you're sort of throwing yourself into air without shape. I'd like to see a bit more of a purposeful arch so that you can come up and down and enter. Again, as mentioned in prior analysis with the other guys, this high splash is indicative of a high drag environment, so you are putting on the hydro brakes by hitting the water like this. And when we are traveling at the start of our race, at the start of any race, we are traveling the fastest we will ever travel in any race. It doesn't matter how good you are or how fast you are. The dive is the fastest part of a race. We want to preserve that speed for as long as possible. And one of the ways we do that is not only by jumping out far, but also by entering the water as smoothly as possible in as good a streamline as possible. Really like that underwater though. There's a little bit of the wiggle at the top, maybe a bit more than I'd like to see, but I really like the size of the kick, and also we can clearly see that you're kicking from your ribs, so great amplitude on that. Maybe a little bit of a weight to get to the surface. Let's see that in full speed. A little bit of a, it's not even a pause, but, and then there we are. Just a moment of, it's not hesitation, but just not driving to the surface necessarily. Your first stroke on your left arm almost doesn't launch you forward, but check out your right arm on this. Your right arm, you can see that pop over. That's what we're looking for. I want to see that on your left arm too. Pretty good stroke rate, going hard. Breath was very nice there. Didn't look like it was egregious in any way. Didn't slow you down. Does look like maybe you're slowing down coming into the wall though. Hard to tell with from this perspective, shooting from behind toward you as you swim away. But just eyeballing, a couple of those strokes definitely look like they slowed down a little bit. Let's check out that left arm. Slow, 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 hack, hack. Versus this. Long, strong, powerful, and relatively easy is always what I want to shoot for rather than a bulldog. The bulldog way, the hacking way, the straight arm recovery can sometimes yield these inconsistencies. You're getting to the most important part of the race here. Hard to tell again because of the perspective, but you two are definitely neck and neck. You definitely could win this race. But the last 10, 15 meters, you allow for an inconsistency to cut your stroke cycle in half. Your right arm looking great the entire time. Your left arm holding you back. So a great note to work on, because if you can fix this, suddenly your last 10 meters are going to be a lot more deadly. Let's see this finish. Overall, I think I like that finish. Always a little hard to tell at this distance how far away you might actually be from the wall. This might want it to have been your last stroke, but again, it's hard to tell if you're a meter away from the wall here or if actually you're only like a foot away. If you were a foot away from the wall here on extension, I'd say yeah, that should be the last stroke. But you are able to get another stroke in, so maybe you were a meter away from the wall. Maybe you needed that last stroke. When it comes to finishing, I truly believe that gliding is more often than not the better option. Taking tiny strokes, tinier strokes than you would do in the middle of the pool or in the first 15 meters of your race. It's not breaststroke where we need to make sure, or butterfly where we need to make sure that we're landing two-handed and adjust for distance hitting the wall and adjust the size of our strokes so that we land perfectly. This is freestyle. We're operating at potentially the highest speeds that swimmers will reach, besides the dive or push off. The glide is about preserving that speed momentum. We can really sit on that and let it work for us, rather than taking a tiny stroke. But let's assume that that was a stroke that you did need to take, in which case I'd say it was good. Hard to tell from this angle. Overall, great swim. A couple nice things to work on. Okay, this is over to Liam now. Let's see, where's the take our marks? I think take our marks has occurred by now, and you have remained extraordinarily stationary. I love that. And we could see you reacted to go. Clearly, I am going to be interested to see what this front leg does as you begin your push. You could, on the back leg, be a little bit smaller of a back angle than you're currently operating at. In the analysis with the other gentleman, we're talking about doing the most effective work possible, and we want to only be in a pushing position with our back leg, so 90 degrees or greater, but the amount of work that you can do is greater if you start from a higher contraction. You want to get a full extension, 90 degrees to 180 degrees versus 85 degrees, 80 degrees to 180 degrees, right? Well, that was wrong. Or like 100 degrees or 95 degrees to 180 degrees. But I think you get the gist. We do want to see, if you get forward motion going on, that this front leg contracts so that you're able to do the same kind of work. From this almost completely extended position, you could probably put hundreds and hundreds of pounds on your back and squat from this contraction to a full extension because you'd be moving the weight an inch or two, right? So great, congratulations, lots of weight can be moved, but the amount of work that you're doing is very minimal. A contracted leg, right, with weight is what we want to see. So let's see. Loving that the first reaction is clearly forward motion, that you're clearly firing that back foot. We actually see your calf flex. Bang. A little bit of a lift at the same time that you are popping that back leg. So great. We can see your front leg is already contracting. So maybe a take your marks position looks more like this. As long as you could balance like this, I'd like this to be where you are at rather than your actual starting position, because why waste these hundreds of seconds going from where you were to this if you could start at this? Great extension of the back leg. Funnily enough, I think he might be ahead of you, but you've got a great reaction and you are head and shoulders above most of the other guys. You're kind of aiming up a little bit. We can see a little bit of that back leg traveling up so fast. It almost looks like it's a bit of a flicking motion. I love the height. I love the angle of attack that you're going for, but that flick sort of tells me that energy is being pushed up rather than out and back. Generally great shape on the entry, but it kind of looks like you have a bit of a float coming in here. Doesn't look as powerful. There's a little bit of a float, but maybe that's just me looking at that. Head's a little low, and this hip pop we're going to see doesn't actually help us enter the water that much smoother. I'd rather see the smoothness, or rather it will be easier for you to create a smooth entry from the shape of the dive rather than the shape of your body entering the water. Because we can see that you enter and that hip pop allows you to not be hitting the water at a lower position, but you still get that slap because you're kind of falling in the water toward the end of that rather than diving purposefully. Very short underwater. I think Gael and I both noted this immediately watching. It's also a decent amount of upper body motion, right? Your shoulders appear to be moving. We want to see motion limited to the ribs down and lack of motion ribs up. But you are quick on the draw. You get going very fast. That first stroke I really like. Power, power. Really long stroke. Very nice. You look it easy. Overall, really nice. I think that finish was pretty darn good as well. Maybe a bit more of a reach. This is a problem I had with watching Albert's finish is, where are we actually in the pool right now? This perspective is hard to tell. Having a side-on perspective would confirm or deny this for us, but this stroke, considering how long your arms are, if you are a foot, 2 feet away, I'd say maybe we wanted to glide on that stroke, because what's your distance per stroke in this entire 50? Is it the same as your left arm is currently experiencing right now? Because if it's not, if it's what I think it is, which is suddenly your distance per stroke, what is it? Whatever it is, X is your average distance per stroke in the entire 50. Well, that's going to be way less than X, that looks like to me. So that makes that a kind of apathetic, vestigial stroke that we just don't need. I'd rather see you traveling at your high speed into the wall and diving into a gliding position, one-armed streamline, and utilizing that speed that you've just created throughout the entire 50 and preserve it. Now, in a perfect world, you have no loss of distance per stroke, and there is zero glide, or an inch of glide or something, right? But you're effectively landing that stroke perfectly on the wall. But we don't live in a perfect world. That's just not going to happen every time. So making that call between taking a second stroke that's maybe unnecessary versus getting a glide that is slightly longer than we'd want it to be, it's a hard one. But if you trust your speed and you trust the length of your arms, I'd say we want to trust the glide a bit more. Overall, great swim. Really like that. Over to Adnan in the far lane. Harder than any of the other guys to tell what body position you are necessarily in. It looks like we can maybe see the hints of your back leg there. Looks like a pretty good position. Looks like about 90 degrees on that back leg. Looks like you're firing the back leg first too. We see the hips moving forwards without any kind of drop of the shoulders or heads. So to me, that tells me that the only way your hips are moving is by extending that rear leg. So great reaction. Relatively good extension, but we can see that your back leg isn't getting a full extension. Check out Ben's leg here. He is at almost a hyper extension because he's pressing so hard and so back, whereas your foot has traveled up and not fully extended. So that tells me a lot of your energy you're putting up and out versus back and down almost. So trying to get a press all the way through your leg, completely contracting the glutes, completely contracting the calf, completely pressing through the foot, getting, to the balls of your feet. That's what I'd rather like to see, and if you can work on that, your start will be more explosive. You'll be getting out farther. You can see that the gentleman in lane 7, I think you start moving before him, moving forward before him. He actually beats you to the punch, but nonetheless, you know what? Actually, I'll take it back. You pretty much make up for it. I mean, he certainly has not as good of a dive and entry as you do, which is a great makeup for that initial little, misalignment, misapplication of force, because your entry was pretty darn good there. Very slow breakout there, Adnan. Just nice and easy, and now you're having to build your speed, right? The first 2 strokes there, I mean, really, I'm going to reverse it again, but I want you to be looking, to the right of this gentleman taking the photographs for the next couple of meters. Look at how much, or how little rather, you're moving. We just talked about how you beat the guy in lane 7 to the dive, right? He may have reacted faster than you, but you certainly are hitting the water sooner and at the same distance, so great, you beat him. But then he's head and shoulders, almost his full torso ahead of you, right? Hard to tell from this perspective necessarily, but your head and shoulder is somewhere here, and his ribs, maybe his hips are there as well. So his underwater, he just ate up half a meter on you, right? Don't let them do that to you in the first 5 meters of the race, first 10 meters of the race. And that happens entirely because of the finish of your underwater. The fastest portion of any race is going to be the dive in the air. The second fastest portion of any race is going to be the underwater immediately following a dive. The third fastest portion of any race is going to be the underwater after a wall. And the fourth and slowest part of any race is going to be the swim. If we have an opportunity to be moving fast, we want to make use of it, okay? I would definitely recommend working on breakouts and driving to the surface and making that where you put your eggs into the basket. It is, I've said this earlier in one of the other breakdowns of another swimmer's swim here, it is easier to go from 100 to 0 than it is to go from 0 to 100. It is easier to stop doing something than it is to start doing something. What we want is to have a good start. What we want is to be operating at the highest potential. What we don't want to do is start low and have to force ourselves to get high. And we can see this exemplified because you start slow and then you have to spend time getting up to speed. I'd rather you learn how to break out and start at full potential speed so that, yeah, you're going to fatigue earlier, certainly. Like, that's how that's going to work. But if you can start at a higher velocity, preserve a higher velocity for longer, then yeah, when that die-off occurs, fine. But you'll have probably spent more meters in the length traveling at a higher speed than otherwise. Really, really neat thing to work on. So that's exciting. Pretty darn good turnover. Like now that you're rolling, you're rolling. Hard to tell with this perspective because you're so far away, and I'm shooting from behind you almost as you're swimming away from me. Looks like a little bit of loss of distance per stroke as we're approaching the wall. But overall, very good fight in. Definitely those last couple of strokes were very short. I think I'm confident saying that, even despite the perspective. You can see that that stroke is a very hacky stroke. That right stroke, again, very hacky. And then that stroke, you're almost hips down, shoulders up, hitting the wall. If you want another review and a look at it, check out Liam's finish. But I was saying the same thing about his finish. We want to be in a fully extended body position. We don't want our average distance per stroke that we spent doing the entire 50 to suddenly be shortened in the last 5 meters. We want to maintain distance per stroke all the way through our race as much as possible, taking these last couple of strokes that are I would say pretty clearly smaller than all of the other strokes you've been doing. It's essentially a time waster, which again, this is a great opportunity for you. If you can practice coming into the wall, maintaining distance per stroke, maintaining velocity, and it's the age-old question, do I take these small strokes so that I hit the wall nicely, or do I glide into the wall and risk, having a slow touch? Well, I think we're at the level where you're traveling fast enough in the race that the glide, it's a near streamline body position. It's the most efficient body position we can be in. You're going to preserve a lot of your forward momentum if you just hold on to that near streamline. If the glide is like 2 feet long, maybe by the end of that 2 feet, you'll see some loss in velocity. But if you spend 3 meters taking tiny strokes, you're 100% going to see a velocity drop. If we watch this at full speed, if the human eye is going to register the difference between 1.8 meters per second velocity or whatever we're traveling at to like a 1.5 meters velocity, if the human eye can track that small difference and see that small difference, it's a pretty clear reality. I'd rather you play the game of, is my glide a little too long? Fine, at least I was traveling at the high velocity. But great race with some great opportunities to improve. Overall, a great race by everybody here.